One of my earliest videos is called Why Christianity is Dying in the West, and I don't really want to rehearse it here. You can go check it out if you want to. But the reason I'm recalling it now is because one of the most consistently repeated comments I got in reply to that video claimed that the real reason Christianity was dying, especially in the West, wasn't what I had identified in the video, but it was rather because the internet had made people less ignorant and less susceptible to the superstitious claims of religion. But I think if you really surveyed the general population since the popularization of the internet, could you really claim that the average person is more accurately informed, more knowledgeable, and more capable of communicating and assessing the truth? If you were to test people's general grasp of knowledge and, let's say, trivia, my impression is that you would get an indication of general decline in mental cognition and our ability to retain knowledge and information. For example, where I live in Canada, adult literacy has fallen dramatically over the past decade, and similarly, math scores in schools have declined at an alarming rate throughout the 21st century, almost in direct correlation with the proliferation of mobile phones and their incessant solicitation of our full attention through notifications and distracting apps. And I don't think this should come as a big surprise to us, right? Like, the less you exercise certain faculties, the weaker they will become. And more, we've come to rely on computers to do our thinking for us. And when they aren't productively thinking for us, they're distracting our minds with garbage content. Today, instead of actually creating an inventory of knowledge and facts, we simply Google something and then forget it as quickly as we learned it because we've already become distracted by the next thing that we searched, or some notification, or some TikTok video or something in our newsfeed. It used to be that young pupils would memorize long portions of sophisticated texts like the Bible, biblical texts, like epic poems like the Iliad or Shakespearean plays. But how many people today who aren't specialists in something like theater can recall long portions of a text like that? It seems to me that among educated people, this is an extremely rare talent. Most of us, it seems, can't even pay attention to anything for any length of time anymore. There were several studies that I had read about, including one done by Microsoft, that said that since the wide adoption of mobile phones, our attention span has decreased dramatically. One stat I saw about Canada said that it had decreased by 33% since that time. And again, this should not come as a big surprise to us, because the more you repeat a habit or behavior, the more ingrained or second nature it becomes. So if you're in the habit of consuming content like TikTok or Twitter or Instagram, where everything is quick and stimulating and amusing, and you scroll past it to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, you are training your mind to only ever be able to consume that kind of content and only ever be able to pay attention to content that is short and highly stimulating. If you eat junk food all day, you will be much less inclined to eat your vegetables. It's a basic common sense. The same is true with the kind of media and content you are feeding your brain on a regular basis. And most kids, from what I can tell, have completely unrestrained access to these technologies and these habits and these apps, which is why I don't think I'm out of line for saying that if you give your kids a smartphone that is loaded with these kinds of apps, you are endorsing the contamination, even the poisoning of their mental abilities, not to mention their moral potential. What the age of the internet has done has given our limited minds an unlimited amount of information, but not necessarily more accurate information. One of the great struggles going on in politics and news media and media in general today is the struggle and the fight against fake news. And we're certainly fumbling our way through that as censorship, often inaccurately targeted, seems to be our only proposed solution. It's at the very least a stark admission that a substantial amount of the information that's on the internet is just false information. And it seems to me that this is a recipe for disaster, because we aren't trained to think critically and logically anymore, because it isn't a part of our formal education as it once was. And that's a necessary component to scrutinize all the information that's out there, from the true information and the false information. It used to be that everyone would get a liberal arts education in countries like Canada and the US. It was the standard model for students from a young age, not to be confused with what is commonly described or named a liberal arts education in most universities today, which is actually antithetical to what is meant by true liberal arts. And the reason it was called a liberal arts education is because it was designed to produce liberty, freedom in the student. After going to grammar school, in which they would learn about the syntax of language, they would devote considerable energy to memorizing facts and texts, like I had alluded to earlier. They would move on to what is called dialectic or logic, what we would commonly think of today as philosophy, where they would then go and organize and scrutinize all of that information that they had memorized in grammar school to think critically about it. And the reason that it would produce liberty and freedom in students is because they could now, after that training, more easily distinguish between what was true and false because of that logical training. They were more familiar with fallacious arguments and common fallacies, and they knew when rhetoric was being used through sophistry in order to manipulate them. So when some misleading advertisement makes fallacious claims, it would be obvious to them. They would be less susceptible to that deception. Advertising really only caught on the way it has after we stopped teaching the liberal arts, and that's because advertising is nothing more than highly stimulating sophistry. And because they would have been trained in dialectic and rhetoric, they would recognize sophistry for what it was. Our freedom and liberty depends on our ability to distinguish between what is true and what is false, which is why Jesus Christ famously said that the truth will set you free. And a classical education was aimed at doing that. And we recklessly discarded it so that we can devote excessive amounts of attention towards math and science skills that the overwhelming majority of educated people will never use in their personal and professional lives. So now when a person in a position of power or authority, like a politician or a judge or a police officer, says something fallacious to us in order to get us to do what they want us to do, we're no longer trained to recognize that for what it is, which makes us more susceptible to the abuse of that authority, and therefore less free. Like today, when I watch a political debate, almost 100% of the so-called arguments that they make are textbook fallacies, and nobody seems to know the difference, which is why we tolerate the state of politics as it is today. And what does it say to you that the people who occupied positions of power and authority, who benefit from that power, are the very same people who make the decisions about what kind of education we get, what kind of curriculum we follow in our education, and that they decided to alter it in such a way that would reduce the common voter's ability to scrutinize valid arguments and rhetoric from sophistry and fallacy. So now you take a population who is no longer trained or able to scrutinize true and false information, and you unleash a fire hose of information at them in the form of the internet. How could we possibly think this is going to be a good or productive thing? Not to mention the fact that we have a limit on what information we can retain as knowledge. It's like giving somebody a bucket for collecting apples in a huge garbage heap of debris, blindfolding them, and then telling them to go scoop up as many apples as they can among the debris. Chances are they're going to get a lot more garbage than apples in that bucket. So with respect to people who want to comment on trends like the decline in affiliation towards Christianity, who want to say that it's because we now have more information, I'm sorry, but that's an incredibly idiotic assessment. We've become a population who has less ability to learn and retain information, less ability to scrutinize the information that we're given, and an overwhelming amount of information that is poured upon us at the same time. And now our education scores are down, our attention spans are more limited, and we are more ignorant than seemingly ever before, again, among educated people. That's the trend that just so happens to correlate with our decline in religious adherence. That seems telling to me. Hey, thanks for watching. The reason I can continue making content like this is because of the generous support of my viewers. If you are able to support the work I'm doing, there are a couple of ways you can do that: by donating through my website or by joining my online community, The Reinforcements. Both can be done by visiting brianholdsworth.ca, the .ca because that's how we internet in Canada. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. And again, thanks for watching.